Hello and welcome to this Python tutorial, and mostly welcome to part 8, Deep Learning. I'm super excited to start this part to eventually get to deep learning because this is one of the most fascinating branch of machine learning. Not only the most fascinating, but also the most powerful. You will see that we will build very powerful machine learning models which will be based on deep neural networks. And that is why today deep learning is used for many power demanding and highly compute intensive tasks, like for example computer vision in medicine. In fact, deep learning can be used for a variety of purposes, from making predictions or classifications for business problems, as what we're about to do right now, or for computer vision, like recognizing faces in pictures or videos, or even recognizing tumors in some brain images. And it is also used for recommender systems with the use of deep Boltzmann machines. But today, we are going to solve this business problem described by Kirill in the previous tutorial, and we're going to solve this business problem using artificial neural networks. So, as you understood in the business problem description, the problem that we're about to deal with is a classification problem. We have these independent variables like the credit score, the balance, the number of products, and so based on these independent variables, we are trying to predict which customers are leaving the bank. So basically, what we're about to do is a classification problem, and artificial neural networks can do a terrific job at doing this, at making that kind of predictions. So that's the first branch of deep learning we're going to study in this first section, and then we're going to study another branch of deep learning, which are convolutional neural networks, and that work very well for computer vision tasks, unlike artificial neural networks. And you will perfectly understand why in Kirill's intuition tutorial. Alright, so let's build our artificial neural network to solve our business problem, as usual, the most efficient way. Alright, so to do this the most efficient way, we need to install a special library, which is the Keras library. And that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. So as you can see here, I'm not only installing the Keras library, I'm also installing the Theano library and the Tensorflow library. So before we install these three libraries, I'm going to explain to you what they are. Alright, so let's start with Theano. Theano is an open source numerical computations library, very efficient for fast numerical computations, and that is based on NumPy syntax. But what is also great about this library is that it can run on not only your CPU, but also on your GPU. So as a reminder, a CPU means central processing unit, and it's basically the main processor on your computer that is used for general purpose, like general tasks that are not graphic tasks. And speaking of graphic tasks, there is another processor that runs computations for that, and this processor is called the GPU. So it's a processor for graphic purposes, exactly like the graphic card you have on your machine. And so in terms of power and in terms of computations efficiency, well, the GPU is much more powerful because it has many more cores and it's able to run a lot more floating points calculations per second than the CPU. And therefore, the GPU is much more specialized for highly compute-intensive tasks and parallel computations, exactly as it is the case for neural networks. You know, when we are forward propagating the activations of the different neurons in the neural networks thanks to the activation functions, well, that exactly involves parallel computations. And same when the error is backpropagated in the neural network, well, that involves again parallel computations. Alright, so basically the GPU is a much better choice for neural networks, especially when you're building deep neural networks to do deep learning. But for simple neural networks, you can still use your CPU. Alright, so that's this Theano library that, by the way, was developed by a machine learning group of people at the University of Montreal. And now what about TensorFlow? So TensorFlow is another open source numerical computations library that runs very fast computations, and again that can run on your CPU or your GPU. This library was originally developed by the Google Brain team at Google and is now under the Apache 2.0 license. And the important thing to understand here is that these two libraries are used mostly for research and development purposes in the deep learning field. That means that if you want to use these two libraries for deep learning, you would use them to build a deep neural network from scratch. That is with many lines of code, which is great if you want to, do some research in order to improve the deep neural networks, invent and develop a new kind of deep neural network, or any other kind of deep learning models, but that would require a lot of lines of code. That is why, in this section, we are not going to directly use Theano and TensorFlow. We're going to use another library that in some way wraps the two libraries here, Theano and TensorFlow. And this library is, as you might have guessed, the Keras library. The Keras library is an amazing library to build deep learning models like deep neural networks in a very few lines of code. So we're still staying in the same spirit of this course, since we're going to build very powerful deep neural networks with only a few lines of code, and that is only thanks to this Keras library. This library was developed by François Chollet, a machine learning scientist, again at Google. Alright, so to summarize, Keras is a library based on Theano and Tensorflow. That means that it runs on Theano and Tensorflow libraries. And exactly as we use scikit-learn to build very efficiently machine learning models, we will use Keras to build deep learning models very efficiently. Great, so now let's install those three libraries. So to do this, the easiest way is to do it from a terminal. So let's do it. Let's start with Theano. I've prepared everything for you here, so we just need to copy this, copy, and then open a terminal. So to open a terminal, you can go to Tools on top of your workspace, and then click on here, Open a Terminal. And the other way is to open the terminal from your computer. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to open the main terminal. Here it is. And inside this terminal, I just need to paste what I've just copied this way, and then press Enter. And this will automatically install Theano. So right now it's doing it. Here we go, installing collected packages, Theano, successfully installed Theano with the latest version. All right, great. So I'm going to put my terminal on the side, and now we're going to install TensorFlow. So to install TensorFlow, we need to go to the website, and the address of the website is right here. So we are going to copy all this and take a browser to go to this website. So here I am on my browser, so I'm going to paste this address here, and let's go there. Alright, so here we are on TensorFlow in the download and setup page. So you will see that you have a lot of options to install TensorFlow. You have the PIP install, the virtual environment install if you want to install TensorFlow in a virtual environment, the Anaconda install, and that's what we're interested in right now because of course we're using Anaconda. Then for those of you maybe who are using Docker, you can install it in a Docker container, and you can also install it from other sources. So we are interested in the Anaconda install way, so let's click on it, and here we are, directed to the Anaconda installation section. Alright, so now what do we have to do? First, we need to create a Conda environment that is called nothing else than TensorFlow. And to do this, you need to consider your version of Python. So if you have Python 2.7 or Python 3.5, I guess most of you have Python 3.5 if you followed the Anaconda installation instructions. So we are going to take this line here. And of course, if you have Python 2.7, you just take this line and you copy it as what I'm about to do right now for this third line here. All right, so copy, and then let's go back to the terminal and paste it here. All right, then press enter. And of course, I get this conda value error because I already created this TensorFlow instance. And that's why it's telling here that prefix already exists. But if it's not your case, if you never installed TensorFlow before, well, that will create a TensorFlow environment. All right, so let's go back to TensorFlow. And so that's the first step done. Now, second step. Second step is to install TensorFlow. So we can install it using conda or PIP. And we're going to do it with PIP because it's the most common way. So the second step before installing TensorFlow is to activate TensorFlow. And to do this, we just need to copy this line, copy, and again in the terminal, paste that here and press enter. All right, and now you can see that my prompt just changed. Before I had the general prompt, and now I have the TensorFlow prompt. All right, so that means that we are in the TensorFlow environment, that it is activated, and now we can install TensorFlow. So to install TensorFlow, we first need to choose a TensorFlow binary URL, and that depends on whether you want to use your CPU or your GPU. Note that if you don't have a powerful GPU in your machine, you can use some very powerful ones for a very cheap price on AWS Amazon Web Services. You can ask me any questions about that in the Q&A if you're interested. So choose the TensorFlow binary URL you want, CPU or GPU, and of course make sure to pick the right system corresponding to your machine. That is, if you are on Linux and Python 3.5, then you need to consider either this for CPU or this for GPU, and same for Python 2.7. And if you're on a Mac, then you need to consider this with the CPU binary URL or the GPU binary URL. Alright, and for those of you who are on Windows, well, there is this section above Here it is, PIP installation on Windows. Well, as you can see, the instructions are more simple. You just need to enter the following command at a command prompt. Well, if you want to use a CPU, you enter this command here. And if you want to use a GPU, you enter this command here at a command prompt. All right, and then let's go back to our installation of TensorFlow. So for this section of this course, we're going to use a CPU because we're not going to build a too deep neural network. You know, we'll use 2 or 3 hidden layers. So CPU will be fine. Besides, our data set is not too large. It contains 10,000 observations, so that's fine. We will be able to run our artificial neural network for this data set using a CPU. Well, of course, it's not going to take 2 seconds. It might take 1 minute, but we will get some coffee. It won't be too long. All right, so let's take this. Let's take the CPU TensorFlow binary URL. So let's do it. Here we go. Copy. And now let's go back to our terminal. Here it is. Pasting it right here and pressing enter. All right, so that just set this TF binary URL equal to this link here. And now we can finally install TensorFlow by copying this command if you're on Python 3. And if you're on Python 2, you copy this command. So copy, terminal, paste, and as you can see, you know, we are using this TF binary URL that we defined here as this link. And now by pressing enter, this is installing TensorFlow finally. All right, so first it's downloading it, and then it's installing it with all the required packages. All right, so as you can see, we have this TensorFlow prompt. So we need to go back to the general prompt because now we will install Keras. So an efficient way to go back to the general prompt is to simply close the terminal here, and then we'll open it again. Otherwise, another way is just to copy this and paste it in your terminal, and this will deactivate the TensorFlow prompt to go back to the general prompt here. But you can also close the terminal and open it again. All right, so now let's install Keras. So let's go back to Spider and eventually install our final library, and the one that we're going to use to build our deep neural networks very efficiently with a few lines of code, and that is Keras. So Keras, to install Keras, we just need to copy this line that is both installing Keras and upgrading it to the last recent version. So let's copy that. Let's go back to the terminal. Here it is. Let's paste this and press enter. And now downloading Keras, installing Keras and the collected packages, everything successfully installed. Great, we are ready to build our ANN. All right, so that's what we're going to do starting from the next tutorial. Until then, enjoy machine learning.